When Jesus says in John chapter 15 verse 4, "Abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me." He's letting us know that in terms of salvation, there's nothing that we can do in and of ourselves. That what we can do can only be achieved through our union and our abiding in or remaining in Jesus Christ. He's the one who will produce the fruits in us. And although there is a part for us to play in terms of our salvation, we have to have obedience and we have to have faith in order to play our part or our role in this whole thing. Yet it is Christ or God who is producing in us these fruits which are acceptable to Him. Now that not only is the case in terms of salvation, and I'm working towards a lesson on salvation, but for this week I'm going to use one other illustration. I used Give Us This Day Our Daily Bread last week and showed where our part lay in the production of bread, and by comparison to God's part we could see that man's part is minuscule in terms of that provision. And that's important for us to see because we forget God's part, which is ginormous. And we can only focus, and we only focus, it's not that we can only focus, we only focus on our part, which in our own eyes is ginormous. But in the scheme of things, it's very small indeed. Now, the illustration I want to look to today is with regard to the land that Israel was promised. I want to show you from Psalm 44 that when seen from the proper angle, this gift, and truly it was a gift from God, was bequeathed to the sons of Israel, although they had their part to play in it. But Psalm 44 recognizes God's part. It says in verse 2, "You with your own hand drove out the nations, then you planted them. You afflicted the peoples, then you spread them abroad. For by their own sword they did not possess the land, and their own arm did not save them. But your right hand and your arm and the light of your presence, for you favored them." And that's quite a description of what happened in the giving of the land to Israel. He looks at it from God's standpoint, and he reduces man's effort in this to nothing. He says it's God who gave you the land. How did he do that? Or not just how did he do it, what did he do? And how did he work through these humans who were to go into the land and to take the land? Well, we'll look at all of that now as we go through the lesson and see how it all worked. Remember in Genesis chapter 12, God made the promise to Abraham that he would give him and his descendants the land. Genesis chapter 12. Now the Lord said to Abraham, "Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." If we turn over to chapter 13 now, we read in verses 15 through 18. "For all the land which you see I will give it to you, and to your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if any man can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants can also be numbered. Arise, walk about the land through its length and breadth, for I will give it to you." Then Abraham moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Of course, this promise was going to be the possession of his sons or his descendants. And Abraham had a little bit of a problem because he had no children. So when God's making a promise like, I will give it to you and your descendants, it created a little bit of difficulty for him. He and Sarah it seemed like couldn't have children. He left Haran when he was 75 years of age. And now, some 15, 20 years later, he still doesn't have any children. So he's way past the childbearing or the child producing age, and his wife is as well. So Abraham wonders, what's going to happen here? How's God going to fulfill these promises? And of course, he poses a solution to the problem to God. He talks about Eliezer of Damascus, who was one of his servants. He wanted him to be then the heir of all that he possessed. And God says, no, one who will come from your own loins will be the one who will inherit all of these blessings. And he asked Abraham to look towards the stars of the sky and count them for number. And he says, so shall your descendants be. And the great thing about Abraham was he believed God. Now, I'm sure if you'd have been a friend of Abraham at the time when Abraham was telling you the story, you would have said, now listen Abraham, I know you're a religious man, and I know that you're, that you want to do what's right in God's eyes and all the rest of it, but this is a bit ridiculous. Now you're taking it a little bit too far here, Abraham. Don't get notions like that at all. It's just not possible at your stage in life, and so you're only banging your head against the stone wall, and you'll hurt yourself and you'll hurt your family, and just forget about this. I'm sure that's not what God told you is going to happen. But Abraham didn't let all of that reasoning go on in his head. With Abraham, and this is why he's the father of faith, when God said it, that was enough for Abraham. He believed God. Now, I wish that all of us were the same way. What happens is we go to the Bible, we hear God's word, and then we start to reason it out. No, hold on now, that's a little bit too much. That's over the top. I'm not going to go there. God, you couldn't want me to do that. I'm not going to do it. That's it. That's the way it is. My life is not going to be conformed to that request that you're making. We're making a mistake. All we're doing here is showing our lack of faith. When Abraham believed God, he showed his faith. Now God revealed something very important here to Abraham. Abraham had asked him the question. He said, "O Lord God, how may I know that I shall possess it?" So he said to him, verse 9, "Bring me a 3-year-old heifer and a 3-year-old female goat and a 3-year-old ram and a turtle dove and a young pigeon." Then he brought all these to him and cut them in two and laid each half opposite the other, but he did not cut the birds. The birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, and Abraham drove them away. Now when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abraham, and behold, terror and great darkness fell upon him. God said to Abraham, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will also judge that nation whom they will serve, and afterwards they will come out with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. Then in the 4th generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete." And it came about when the sun had set that it was very dark, and behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch which passed between these pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, "To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt as far as the great river Euphrates." Now, a number of things. He was reassuring him he would have descendants. And he says, "I will give it to you in that I give it to your descendants." He says, "But your descendants will be in captivity for about 400 years. They were in Egypt for about 400 years. And then he says they will be delivered from there and they will come and possess the land. I have given them the land. So in God's plans, this was a done deal. It was already finished in his mind. He knew where they were going and what they would do. And the reason it would take so long for the promise to be fulfilled was the fact that the iniquity of the Amorites, they were the Canaanites who lived in the land, he says, was not yet full. In other words, they're not bad enough to put them to the sword right now. They're not bad enough for us to go to war with them, or for me to do anything by way of punishment on them. But by the time this 400 years is complete, they will have reached the fullness of their iniquity. I think it must have been, the only thing I can compare it with would be the days of Noah, when he says the thought of man's heart was only evil continually. Every imagination, every thought of man's heart was only evil continually. Now, we're in a bad state. I think anyway. I think we're in a bad way as far as wickedness is concerned in our society. But it can get a lot worse. All the barriers are broken down. Sexuality is without limits. Anything goes. Can you imagine what it means to live in a society like that, where your wife and your children are at risk all the time? Can you imagine what it would be like for people to surround your house because there's a stranger in it and try and bash down the door so that they might have relationships with him? Can you imagine how depraved things can get? It is nothing right now by comparison to what it can be. And if it continues on the course it's on, and nobody calls a halt to it, or our society doesn't wake up and make the changes it needs to make in order to stabilize this whole thing, we are in serious trouble. Not only have we got problems with sexuality, we've got problems with violence. They all go hand in hand with each other. The greed that is there will bring about violence. We're seeing it in our own country here as well. In Limerick, here in Dublin, the gangs that are going around and they'll kill whoever they want to kill. I never thought I'd see the day in Dublin or in Ireland where there'll be so many murders. And then splashed all over the front of the paper, the funeral of a man who had 12 people killed, and there were 400 people at that funeral. And they were there with their dark glasses on and their suits, and they had no shame in them at all to walk behind the coffin and to give this man honour. I'm sure if I died or you died, there wouldn't be 400 people at the funeral. That'll give you a measure of the support that they've got. But society goes that bad. And I'm making this point because when the children of Israel go into the land of Canaan, they were told to destroy. They were God's instrument of punishment on a wicked and a depraved people whose wickedness had got so bad that God said, no more, enough. They don't even deserve to live. Because there's some very delicate people who think God's very heavy-handed. God is to do such things like that. The people of God to do such things like that, how could it happen? Listen, they were doing it to themselves. They enjoyed the violence. And when they enjoyed it, God gave it to them in bucket loads. He gave them what they wanted. But now the time for judgment had come. And when it does come, and this is a warning for all of us, there is a judgment day coming for this world. A judgment day when everybody will answer for what they've done in the body according to what they have done. And God's mercy and God's grace will be finished for the wicked on that day. He'll make the judgment, and it will be merciless. There will be no pity in it. It will just be pure and absolute justice. And they will be repaid according to their deeds, and that repayment will last for eternity. But people don't believe that. They're dancing on the edge of a volcano and they're having great fun. They don't know that soon enough that will explode and all the fun will be finished. But then the answering comes, and the judgment comes, and the punishment comes. Alright, after they were delivered from Egypt, now we've jumped 400 years now, up to the point where they were delivered. We all know about the 10 plagues and so forth. We all know about the parting of the Red Sea and how the children of Israel walked over on dry land, and how when the Egyptians attempted to do it, the walls of the water fell in on them and they were all drowned, but the children of Israel had been delivered. They were brought up to Mount Sinai, and at Sinai God gave them his law and entered into a covenant relationship with them. But while he was giving them his law, he did mention about the promise that was made to Abraham and about the land and how he was going to give it to them. Let's look at Exodus chapter 23. Beginning with verse 20. He says, "Behold, I am going to send an angel before you to guard you along the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Be on your guard before him and obey his voice. Do not be rebellious towards him, for he will not pardon your transgressions, since my name is in him. But if you will truly obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. For my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and I will completely destroy them. You shall not worship their gods nor serve them, nor do according to their deeds, but you shall utterly overthrow them and break their sacred pillars in pieces. You shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will remove sickness from your midst. There shall be no one miscarrying or barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days. I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion all the people among whom you come, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you. I will send hornets ahead of you, so that they may drive out the Hivites and the Canaanites and the Hittites before you. I will not drive them out before you in a single year, that the land may not become desolate and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. I will drive them out before you little by little, until you become fruitful and take possession of the land. I will fix your boundaries from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the wilderness to the river Euphrates. I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you will drive them out before you," he says. So God intended to be very much involved in this. It was part of a judgment. It was part of a judgment on heathenism. Now, heathenism was steeped in all sorts of wickedness and wrongdoing. But it was also steeped in the idea of false gods. Gods that they had made in their own image. Gods which were in the images of cows and bulls and other flying animals and creeping things. And they bowed down before these things and they worshipped them. Now, this was false religion. They were taking what belonged to God alone, and they were, how would I say, superimposing the glory that belonged to God on an object in the likeness of man, or a four-footed animal, or a crawling creature. It was abhorrent to God what they were doing. It was a madness that had entered into their heart and they had gone along with for centuries. And the reason for it is they didn't want to know God. They wanted things on this earth the way they wanted it. They didn't want it the way God wanted it. So God had made a great promise to them here. Now, if they'd have had faith, He was giving them the law, He was showing them His power, He had showed them His power all through Egypt, and they could have gone up and taken the land. But before they went into the land, they sent out 12 spies. The people had asked for this, and God had sanctioned it because Moses was pretty happy with the idea. He thought that was a very good idea. Sent out 12 spies, and they were very high up officials in each of the tribes. And when they came back, they said the land was productive, all right, but it was a land that devoured its inhabitants. There were some giants in the land that made them feel like grasshoppers. And they said, we can't take it. 10 of them were saying, we can't take it. Now they had forgotten, or they just didn't like to think about the fact that God says, I will give you this land. They had forgotten God's words. They had no faith in what God has promised them. They now just see this whole situation from the standpoint of what my eyes see and what my instincts tell me and what I know of life. There's no way in the wide world we can go up there and take this land. I'm telling you, we're done for. That was their attitude. There was just two of them, Caleb and Joshua. Caleb was of a different spirit, the Lord says to us. And his attitude is, yeah, let's go up. It's ours. It's been given to us. Let's take it. You think they listened to him? Not at all. There was about 2 million, we think there's about 2 million people in this camp, right? And for the vast majority of them, they're crying for the whole night in their tents. Their hope of realizing this promise is now gone from them. They hadn't believed the Lord. They continue not to believe the Lord. And now they're in an awful position. They're not in Egypt, where they could get the leeks and the fish and the onions and all the other stuff that they used to get so readily. They've just come out of the wilderness. They're not going to be able to get into the land of promise. Where are they going to go? What's our future here, Lord? Why did you bring us to this point? You're killing us. You're destroying us, Lord. Why are we here? And that night it was revealed that they should now turn around and go back into the wilderness. But just as fickle as they are, and where the next morning they get up, no, we're going to go up there, we're going to do what the Lord tells us to do. Moses says, don't go up. The Lord's not with you. That's not what He's telling you to do. You need to keep your head and understand that He's telling you now to go back into the wilderness. That's what you need to do. Let's look at this now in Numbers chapter 14. He just said in verse 24, but my servant Caleb, because he has had a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land which he entered, and his descendants shall take possession of it. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites lived in the valleys. Turn tomorrow and set out to the wilderness by way of the Red Sea. Of course, Moses had spoken this to the people. Verse 40 then, in the morning, however, they rose up early and went up to the ridge of the hill country, saying, here we are, we have indeed sinned. Now this is very impressive. We have sinned. We have lacked in faith. We have questioned God's ability. We have sinned. But we will go up to the place which the Lord has promised. Oh, that sounds really good. Very good. That now they've got to change your heart. You'd say, God bless them, that's terrific. But their change of heart was only a change of heart that they wanted. It wasn't a change of heart that God wanted. God says, turn around and go back into the wilderness. They said, no, we're going to go up and we're going to take the land. Moses says, don't go up, the Lord's not with you, can't win. course they go up. 42 says, do not go up, or you will be struck down before your enemies, for the Lord is not among you. For the Amalekites and the Canaanites will be there in front of you, and you will fall by the sword, inasmuch as you have turned your back from following the Lord, and the Lord will not be with you. But they went up heedlessly to the ridge of the hill country. Neither the ark of the covenant of the Lord nor Moses left the camp. When the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in the hill country came down and struck them and beat them down as far as Hormah. They were absolutely dumped on, and it was their own fault. It was the repayment for their lack of faith and their disobedience. It was their own fault. But what it does prove is that if Israel was to go and try and take the land of Canaan in their own strength, they had not got the ability to do it. And this is where we fall down all the time, brethren. I've got a problem, and it's a big problem, and I'm trying to work out how to resolve that problem. Do I go to God? Oh, no, hold on. I'm too worried to be talking to God. I haven't got the time for this. I've got to sort out this problem. So I don't even talk to God about it, and I get into resolving this problem as best as I know with my own wisdom, and I'm going to resolve it through my own strength. And you fail. You fail miserably. And rightly so. But you see, we never learn the lesson. We never learn, I need to talk to God about this. I need to even ask the question, does God say anything in His Word about this? Now, this needs to be done before you further complicate the situation. And you need to go, if you don't know the answer, to somebody or others who would or might know the answer. And ask the questions before you make your moves. This is the counsel of the Lord that you're asking for. You are looking to His wisdom and to His strength to be able to accomplish what He's telling you to do. That's the way to go about it. It's not the way Israel was going about it right now, but that's the way to go about it. A lesson we need to learn, and we need to learn it quickly, because we haven't got much time to resolve all our problems. And the problems we do have, we need to go about it in the right way. Alright, well, getting back to Israel now. Of course, they were pushed out into the wilderness. And all of that generation who did not believe in the Lord died in the wilderness. It was 38 years before they got back to this point to where they could enter into the land. 40 years in all before they actually entered into the land. They went over what they call Transjordan. The Jordan River sort of splits Canaan in two. On the right-hand side, or the east side, is what they call Transjordan. And on the west side of the Jordan River is Israel itself, what we know as Israel now, what they thought was the Promised Land. But they went up the side of the Transjordan on the west side. They passed by Edom, which the Lord says, don't touch their land, I've given it to them. And they passed by Moab as well. But they encountered then two kings who just didn't want to allow Israel to go any further than where they were. The king was Shihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, two kings of the Amorites. Now they encountered these kings, and God says to them, and they had learned some lessons in the 38 years they were out there. Go up and fight against them, I've given them into your hands. And they did. And you know what happened? Oh, I don't even have to tell you, do I? They won the battle. Each time they won the battle. Now, of course, God is giving them this reassurance before they even cross over the Jordan. Just to tell them, when you do what I ask you to do, and you ask me to help you, I can assure you that I will, and that I will give you what you're asking for. if it's in accordance with my will. So these victories were but an example of the certain victories that awaited them in Canaan. Let's go to the book of Deuteronomy chapter 3, 21 and 22. He says there, I commanded Joshua at that time, saying, your eyes have seen all that the Lord your God has done to these two kings. So the Lord shall do to all the kingdoms into which you are about to cross. Do not fear them, for the Lord your God is the one fighting for you. That's very important. Joshua said, it was told, the Lord told Joshua, look, take this as an experience which will be a constant experience when you get over into the land of Canaan. I will give you this land. So Joshua needed to believe the Lord. Joshua needed to be faithful to the Lord and keep in the Lord's will. And Joshua needed to have courage, as did all the people, to go out there and fight the good fight of faith. But you have to understand, their part was, they had to face the fear and fight anyway. And I was listening to some discussion about what's happening on the battlefields in Afghanistan and other places like that, and how many soldiers come back. And there's more soldiers, it seems, from the statistics, who commit suicide after they come home than is actually killed on the battlefield. That surprised me. But it's such a horrendous experience. It's a hell experience. It's really what it is. I don't doubt that at all in my own mind. But they had to face this. They had to face all the physical exertion, the psychological revulsion, the blood, the guts, the pain, the wounds that they would have suffered. Remember, this was hand-to-hand stuff. Swords were sharp, razor sharp, and you went into that battle and you were trying to kill the enemy, but he was trying to kill you as well. And no doubt there were many people left with maybe ears gone, hands gone, eyes gone, gouged out, and all sorts of horrible things like that. I'm saying this for the kids because they love this stuff all together, his eye was hanging out, oh, tell us more, I love it. But I know the adults are revolted by it, but there's a truth here. There was the guts and the pain from these wounds, the loss of limbs, and the mayhem of war, and of course, myriads of people dying at their hands every day. So we mustn't underestimate the sacrifice that they had to make in order to take the land of Canaan. That was their part. They needed to have the faith, they needed to have the holiness in their lives, and the courage that God was with them, and that they would win the victories. Now God, knowing the great task that was before them, gave them a number of assurances, which I want you to see. God's always concerned about our needs, and this is one part of how he bolstered them up, or supported them, put scaffolding around them. The first was, they had sent out 2 spies. Remember this story about Rahab the harlot, and she hid them. There was flax drying out on the top of her roof. They had these flat roofs over there, and the sun shines most of the time, so they were able to dry out the flax there. But she had believed in the Lord. And here's the reason why she had. Joshua chapter 2 now, verses 8 to 11. Joshua chapter 2. When she was hiding them on the roof, she said to the men, verse 9, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you, when you came out of Egypt, and what he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Shihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. And then she asked them to just, because I'm going out on a limb, if they find out I'm hiding you, I'll be killed. She said, well, will you save me and save my family? And they said, we will. You just stay in your house and you can tie that red cord on the window and you will be safe so long as you're in that house. And of course that did transpire. But for the spies to have reported that back to Joshua and the others must have been a great boost. Psychologically they were beaten already. Their hearts had melted. God had seen to it that He had prepared that aspect of things before they even moved in proper to the land of Canaan. And then when they crossed the Jordan River, the priests were to carry the Ark of the Covenant. And of course the river was stopped up at a place called Adam, a number of miles up the way. It was in flood. So the Canaanites were not afraid of them coming across. They thought they would never get across. They'd have to wait till the waters subsided. But the water stopped and they walked over the Ark of the Covenant first, went into the centre of the river, and they all walked over on dry ground. It was a replica of what had happened, albeit a smaller one, of what had happened at the Red Sea. But you see, there was a generation that grew up in the wilderness that hadn't experienced the Red Sea or were too young to remember the Red Sea. So they needed this. God demonstrating His power in nature and His control over nature. And of course, they did cross the Jordan on dry land. And that just made the Canaanites even worse, because the story of that would have got about very quickly. Can you imagine? And then Joshua had a very personal experience. If you go to chapter 5, verses 13 through 15, it says, it came about when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? He said, no, rather, I indeed come now as captain of the host of the Lord. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed down and said to him, what has my Lord to say to his servant? The captain of the Lord's host said to Joshua, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. So here's his burning bush experience. He meets the captain of the host of the Lord. In other words, God is at the head of this army. God is fighting for you and with you. You need not be afraid. We will get the job done. And the next little bit of comfort that they got was how Jericho felt to them. Now, Jericho was one of the strongest cities of the Canaanites. Great big fortifications. So God tells them, all right, there's to be a few of the army in front, there's to be the priests and the Ark of the Covenant, and there's to be some more of the army at the back. You walk around that wall once a day for 6 days. And the kids know this because of the song. And on the 7th day, you walk around 7 times. Now you can imagine the Canaanites on the wall, and they're expecting a full frontal attack. And next minute, there's this silent procession and carrying the Ark of the Covenant. Now they know that they are fighting not just against Israel, but against the God of Israel, who claims to be the Lord of all the earth. And you can imagine when they went around the first time, there was probably silence and bewilderment. The next day, when this started again, I can see the lads. Oh, look at this, boys. Here, what are they going to do to us now? They're going to frighten us, say boo or something. And you can imagine the jokes and the jibes and the cries from the ramparts and how with dignity they walked around and did it for 6 days. By the time the 6th day come, they probably weren't even jeering anymore. They were just jaded with it. And then on the 7th day, they walked around the 7th time. God told them that the trumpets need to blow and the people need to shout. And when that happened, there must have been some sort of an earthquake, and the walls of Jericho fell in. And of course, the children of Israel went right into the city and took the city. Now, if there was ever proof that God was with them, and this was God's victory and not their victory, this was the proof. They still had to fight. They still had to assert their power and authority. They still had their part to play, but the victory had been guaranteed and had been given to them. And that's the point. When you have an experience in life where God has answered your prayer and shown His power, and that in a spectacular way, why should you ever doubt again when you get either the same problem coming up or another problem that might come up that is threatening you once more? Why should you not say, He did it for me once, He can do it for me again. As long as I'm faithful to God and doing what is right, there's no reason why I can't have the victory here. That's what faith does. Now, when those kings in the southern part of Canaan now realized what was happening, they thought, well, we better get together here and oppose these Israelites. So there was a coalition of kings in the south who fought against them. That's Joshua chapter 10. We won't have time to go into it all. It was the day where the sun stood still in the sky. It was a request by Joshua. They were winning the victory, but had the day run out, they wouldn't have been able to complete it. So Joshua appeals to the Lord, and the Lord answered his prayer. This wasn't the age of miracles. They would have thought it would have passed with Moses. But things can happen which we cannot explain. Agnes can tell you, things can happen that you just cannot explain. Except that you say, God intervened and heard our requests and made it good. People have had these requests made on their behalf and they've been blessed, but have forgotten the blessing and haven't responded in thanksgiving and praise and worship and lifting up their voices, because it has been so subtle, so second by second, that it seems like it just happened naturally. But everything the doctor said was against what happened. But God made it happen. Of course, when the southern kings were defeated, the northern kings got together. And they came against Joshua and his armies. This was a bloody time. The only chance I can use bloody with music. This was a bloody time, it was. And again, now they're faced with enormous odds. And of course, God helped them and they defeated the northern territories. So by this time now, the land has been taken. There was, as God says, it wasn't going to be all in one day. There were still little places, city-states where the Canaanites were still there. Now it was up to, and Joshua was too old now. He was finished, and he just wanted the people to continue. He says everything God promised is being fulfilled, but you need to continue in the faith and drive these people out, as God has said. Let's look at Joshua now, chapter 21, 43 to 45. It says there, so the Lord gave Israel all the land which He had sworn to give to their fathers, and they possessed it and lived in it. And the Lord gave them rest on every side according to all that He had sworn to their fathers, and no one of all their enemies stood before them. The Lord gave all their enemies into their hand. Not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass. Now, he'd just been telling us in a few chapters earlier that there were still parcels of land which hadn't, where they hadn't driven out the Canaanites. he got spies to go around there, he got them to take down all the information about the land, and he apportioned it to the rest of the tribes. So as far as that was concerned, God was saying, it's yours. All you need to do now is go up and take it. But of course they didn't do it. They decided in their head the compromise was easier. These Canaanites, we can put them to work. We can't have cheap labour here. Why have a battle? Why fight against it? They're part of the land now. They've been here such a long time. We're tired of fighting. This is not the thing to do for civilized people. In other words, what they were saying is, just let's make it easy on ourselves. We've had it hard long enough. This is a lovely place. Everything's going well for us. Let's just make it our own. And if the Canaanites are there, we'll use them for our own ends, and that should sort it all out. All right. Well, it took until the time of David and Solomon before the actual extent of the land from the river Euphrates down to the borders of Egypt were given to them as their possession. Because it was David who had such great faith, the faith which so many of the Israelites lacked, who was able to complete the job. And then Solomon, who followed David, then ruled peaceably over all that land which had been promised them. So God fulfilled his word. He had done so, and had done so in a spectacular way. The full extent was now reached. And as it said in Psalm 44, 2 and 3, the Lord, not the men with the sword, the Lord had given me this land, this promise. It'll be the same for us when we get to heaven. All the battles that we have had to fight here will be God's victory. If you've had your faith in God and you had enough hope in your heart to trust God and enough courage in your heart to do what he asks you to do. If you do that, the victories are assured and the prize will be won. And the prize is infinitely great. Infinitely great. What we're looking for is life, the life that Jesus sought to bring us, and life abundant. It is a share in the life of God Almighty, the infinite God, the self-sustaining God, the self-existent God. He's prepared to share, and that life is the life. It is the most wonderful life. And Angela's just showed me some photographs that she took up in the zoo of all those animals and birds and the wonderful detail. And you'd think, what God has a wonderful mind. God has a wonderful ability to bring these things into existence. And the glory of them and the wonder of them. And it is glorious and wonderful if we take time just to look. And if he could do that with a small world like this, what's it going to be like in heaven? Where all of our needs will be looked after, where we will share in the glory of God and in his presence, where everything will be perfect, everything will be as God wants it to be. That's the prize. Are you going to die in the wilderness because of lack of faith, wither and die because of lack of faith? Or are you going to embrace what God promises you in his word and say, that's for me? That's the message I've wanted to hear all my life. That's what I want. If I have to do a bit of fighting, if I have to stand up for what is right, if I have to be rejected, what does it matter? That's what I want. And that's what I'm going for. Do you have enough faith to do that? Well, that's what you need. And hopefully this lesson from Joshua and the men who accompanied Joshua during his day will be of infinite value to you. And an encouragement to persevere, fight the good fight of faith, and you have to continue to fight it until the course is finished. Then what is laid up for you is what was laid up for Paul, the imperishable crown of glory, which the Lord, the righteous judge, Paul says, will give to me on that day, but not to me only, but to all those who love his appearing. Take these things to heart.